Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Welcome to Crime Redefined. I'm Dion Mitchell, along with my co-host, Mehul Anjaria. Today's episode is about an incredible new book by Ice-T and his ex-partner in crime, Spike, called Split Decision. Today's guest is the guy that brought it all together, author Douglas Century.
Yeah, Douglas Century has a history with Ice-T. He first worked with him on their 2011 book, Ice, a memoir of gangster life and redemption from South Central to Hollywood. So when Ice-T scored another book deal, Douglas Century was his first call. Their new book, Split Decision, is a fantastic look at the lives of two guys who went on radically divergent paths.
Yeah, that's for sure, Mehul. It's no wonder that Ice went back to Douglas. He's got the chops. He went to Princeton, has co-authored or co-authored many best-selling books, not to mention frequently writing for the New York Times and Billboard.
Yeah, Doug is a prestigious writer, no doubt. I mean, in addition to Split Decision, he's got another new book out about the Russian mob called The Last Boss of Brighton. So, Douglas is no stranger to covering these hardcore topics and delivering wonderful real-world descriptions in these books.
In Split Decision, Doug chronicles when Ice met Spike and they turned into star jewel thieves. Ultimately, Ice went on to superstardom, and Spike, on the other hand, stayed in the game a little bit too long and ended up with a murder charge and was sentenced to 35 years to life after a robbery he planned went tragically wrong, Mehul.
Yeah, the book Split Decision, in its essence, is really just a harrowing cautionary tale about a couple of things. One is the addiction of crime, the impact of just one bad decision in your life. And I'd say from Ice-T's viewpoint, how to get on top, but not only just that, how to stay on top and not backslide at all cost.
Yeah, that's for sure. And Doug was kind enough to give us a very in-depth and behind-the-scenes entertaining interview. So we really hope you enjoy the ride.
Hey, Doug, we've been so excited to talk to you about Split Decision, and we're really impressed and moved by the book. So thank you so much for joining us on Crime Redefined today.
It's great to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome, Doug. I've got to say this book is a great gateway drug for us, and we're ready to read more of your books. Before we get into Split Decision, we're curious about your career trajectory. You studied English at Princeton. At that point, did you know exactly what you wanted to do in life?
Well, I was planning to be a novelist. I was always writing. I mean, even as young as 17, I wrote a novella. And I was in the writing program, the creative writing program and English at Princeton. So I thought, I'd be a fiction writer. But when I got to New York, I sort of fell into selling book reviews and music reviews. And that led to me writing for the New York Times. Before I knew it, I was writing nonfiction and I was hanging out with some gang guys in Brooklyn. Kind of related to hip hop, actually. But then I sold my first book to, it was called Street Kingdom, to Warner Books. And before I knew it, I was writing about crime and gangsters. And I've always been interested in that subject. But no, I think you sort of, like I said at one point in the book, you don't guide life, you ride life. So I thought I'd be a fiction writer, and here I am writing nonfiction. And true crime has sort of been my thing for a while, and now true crime is sort of all anybody wants to hear about in a weird way.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that debut book. It seems like you got a lot of high praise for that book. So, I mean, how did it feel to kind of hit a home run out of the gate? And then what did that do for your career?
Well, I got a good book deal. I got an agent, and he's a fantastic agent, and he sold the book. I wrote a great proposal. Sometimes I think I'm better at writing proposals than books. But yeah, the art of it, I might do a master class at some point, because the art of it is it's not how do you come up with an idea? It's how do you actually make that idea into a proposal and sell it to a publisher.
Yeah.
And publishers won't take manuscripts unless you have a good agent. So there's a whole process to this stuff. But, a good writing professor of mine once said, when I got a few great reviews. He was my professor at Princeton, but he's a very well-known novelist. And he said, look, Doug, if you believe the good ones, you also have to believe the bad ones. True. And I've had some bad reviews. So it's really better to just sort of look at them as an opinion. You get a rave review from Publishers Weekly, and then the New York Times pans your book, or you get a rave review from the New York Times and somebody else pans it. So, it has to be more internal than external in terms of how you feel about your writing. And I know, filmmakers who will tell me I don't read any of my reviews. And I find that it's brilliant, but I find that hard to believe in today's social media world where,
Right.
I mean, how do you avoid it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like almost like, do you not have Twitter? Do you not have Instagram? But it's great to be validated by critics. It's also great to be validated by sales. And the thing is, you can't control either of those things. You really can't.
Right.
People ask me, like, how does it feel? I had 2 books out this summer, the one I did with Ice-T and Spike and another one about the Russian mob. And somebody asked me about it. And I said, it's like when you have a kid, you just kind of send it out into the world. There's a point where you're protective of it. But once you publish it, the reaction, what people say on Goodreads or Amazon or how it's selling, it's really kind of beyond your control. So you have to be a little bit fatalistic about it and sort of say, well, I've done what I did. I wrote the book. Hopefully it's good. And now it will take on whatever life it takes on, So I don't know. That's a little bit, it's a little bit of a philosophical way of looking at writing, but you don't have a lot of control. And that first book I did led to a lot of other opportunities, including writing about undercover investigations, detectives, and and then you, like I said, you ride the roller coaster.
No, that sounds like a great way to stay sane through all this process.
Yeah. I mean, if you get gassed up because, when I was writing that first book, so I was they said I infiltrated a gang. I didn't really. I was just hanging out with these rappers. And before I knew it, I'd spent like 5 years just hanging out, like listening to like hip hop, guys who were freestyling on the corner. And a friend of mine, after years of hanging out, and this is a really rough part of Brooklyn, Crown Heights, a buddy of mine said, you should write a book about this. And I wasn't planning to. That's what was kind of interesting about it. I was just sort of hanging out. But yeah, you get a kind of, while I was writing that first book, I remember getting film scouts, which were, I didn't know you're not supposed to talk to them, but from, let's say, for argument's sake, Leonardo DiCaprio's company or Robert De Niro's company. And they were like, well, what's the status of your manuscript? And then your agent says, never talk to those people. Don't ever talk to them. So you just get this sort of crazy idea. Oh, Leonardo DiCaprio is going to make a movie of my book. And then, I'd say 99.9% of the time it doesn't happen, but it does. It's very hard when you're young not to let that stuff affect you. And some of the great writers, some of the greatest writers, I think, published too young. Like F. Scott Fitzgerald, he had great success at 24, and it's sort of like you've heard Bret Easton Ellis, people like that talking about the trouble with having success at a very young age when you're really not ready for it. So I kind of think the ideal age to become established as an author is sort of mid-30s, because at least, you got to censor
yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you've lived. Like the problem with creative writing programs, and I love, they're great places to learn how to write. But you are 21. Like I was writing fiction at Princeton. Okay, 18, 19, 20. What have you really done with your life? You're writing
right.
You're writing about the suburbs, and so the great, even I think the great novelists like Hemingway worked as journalists. A lot of them, or had some background in covering boxing, covering war, so they had material. So, and honestly, I think that's the best thing you can do as a writer is just go do stuff. Go, whether it's traveling or the best advice I would have to a young writer is don't just navel gaze and sit there writing about your family or your autobiography. And I mean, James Joyce could do it. There are certain authors who could do it, but they were so good at it. It's a lot better to go out there and learn. Hemingway went from high school to being a crime reporter, actually, or just a regular beat reporter for the Toronto Star. And you can actually look up some of his articles were just like routine crimes and things like that. And you realize, I think journalism is a great path to being either a fiction writer or, of course, a nonfiction writer. And television discovered that with David Simon. I think he kind of brought that with The Wire, getting back to, criminology and stuff.
Great series.
Yeah, great series. But like it comes from reporting. It comes from being on the streets. Cops know what's going on, and the kind of reporters who have access to cops know what's going on. And I think they inform some of the best crime writing that there is. I was going to say, or you're someone like Ice-T and Spike who actually live there.
right. That's a whole nother level.
Yeah. And I can't claim to that, but I do have enough experience now. I've known so many criminals and gangsters that, this Russian mob guy I wrote a book with when I first met him. I wrote a book about him. I'm sorry. He said, "Doug, I like you. You have criminal mind." And I was like, what? I do? Oh, geez. I mean, I can understand how criminals think now, but yeah, you got to put in what they used to call, gumshoe detectives with what they call a shoe leather. Just, get out there, see the world, understand what's going on, and outside of your little bubble.
Well, it gives you a reality base point, a starting place, like a real foundation to build off of, I think.
Yeah,
like all the good stuff, like The Wire and things like that, like you said, it all comes from people that actually were out there covering these sections of Baltimore or wherever.
Yeah. And the second book I did was with a New York City police detective who went undercover in the mob, in the garbage rackets for 3-4 years. And that led, because that book was a New York Times bestseller, that led me to getting other offers from other undercover. I actually wrote this book under and alone about Billy Queen, ATF agent, went undercover in the Mongols, but I took my name off it because the Mongols are a very violent outlaw motorcycle gang out there in LA.
Good move.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that was the best-selling book I've ever done. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for like 35 weeks. And at the last minute, I said, take my name off it. But I now acknowledge that because the Mongols are very happy about that book because it helped their recruiting and
everybody won.
Yeah, everybody won. People think,
and you didn't die.
And I didn't die. Yeah. But I said to Billy when we were doing the book, because we then did another book, which was we co-authored. I said, Bill, is there, they don't have Mongols in New York City where I live. And he goes, no, but they have pagans and they're nearby. And they found pagans are allied with the Mongols and everybody's kind of against the Hells Angels. And he goes, they found my face picture, his undercover name was Billy St. John. And this book, Under and Alone, has been very popular for whatever reason. People love the biker world. He said they found my photo in a Mongols clubhouse and said, like, kill on sight. So I said, okay, take my name off the book.
Oh, yikes. That's real.
But what's funny is I really helped him write the book, but then in his acknowledgments, I didn't see them before they went to press, and it said, yeah, special thanks to my book author, Doug Century. And I was like, oh man, you put me in there anyway. So,
oh man.
But they never actually tried to reach out through me. I have been threatened by other people, but not bikers. And I think if people are going to do something to you, they'll just do it. They won't
tell you about it. Yeah,
this is true. Yeah.
So, of course, Split Decision is your second outing with Ice-T. Can you tell us how 2011 book, Ice, Memoir of Gangster Redemption from South Central Hollywood came to be? And then had you worked with Ice before writing that book?
No, what happened is a friend of mine who works with Ice on some projects said, you want to meet Ice-T? And I mean, geez, I think I first saw him when I knew some of his rhymes, but I mean, when I saw Colors in '88,
right.
I saw that in a movie theater in Manhattan, and it was like, whoa, I know it wasn't accurate about the gang life, but so I've known Ice's work. But this was around 2009. I went to his, he has a house in New Jersey, but this was when he still had an apartment with Coco. And I just show up and literally Coco is vacuuming and he's just, he's got his gold and platinum albums all over the place. But the idea, he had an idea and he was like, I think we should do a book, me and Coco, about our crazy rock and roll lifestyle. And this was kind of when everybody was, Pamela Lee and, Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee. So he said, I'm like, I've been a player, I've been a pimp, but I could have any woman I want kind of. And yet, I'm monogamous to Coco. Coco knows every guy wants her. So we have this crazy life. And I was like, is there a book there? But they ended up doing, I think, a reality show on E.
Yeah. Ice Loves Coco.
Yeah. So that's what that became. But while he was sitting there, he was like, well, man, I got orphaned when my mom died when I was 7. My dad died when I was 11. I'm out there in LA living with my aunt and she didn't want me there. So I got my high school girlfriend pregnant. So I joined went airborne training. Then I was like, well, wait, hold up. What? You were orphaned? Like, he said, yeah. I didn't have any brothers and sisters. I got sent to LA and was born in a middle-class family or at least a working lower middle-class family in New Jersey. He had a kind of stable 2-parent home, but then both his parents died of heart attacks. And then he gets sent to live in South Central LA right in the 70s when the gangs are just kicking, really kicking into gear. And he's at Crenshaw High School. So, and then I was like, you were airborne? Like he actually didn't serve. He trained to be in the 82nd Airborne, but was then stationed in the infantry in Hawaii. And I go, Ice, I mean, have you told this story? And he goes, yeah, in a bunch of my rhymes. But I said, no, but this is your book, like the self-made man, the guy who was, I said, it's like Charles Dickens or something. So we just kicked it, and then he's so easy to work with. He's such a great guy. Half the time I would just be like getting phone calls from him on the set of Law and Order. Like between when he doesn't have a scene, he's got hours, but he can't really leave. So I just record him. And then I made that book into, I think it's a great memoir. I mean, it really tells his story, but we did it, I don't know, a few face-to-face meetings, but a lot of it on the phone. And then with this book, he calls me up and just, I don't know, out of the blue, I get a phone call. He goes, yo, Doug, your numbers are the same, right? And I said, yeah, same, haven't changed. He goes, I got a book deal with Simon & Schuster, but they want you to write it. And I was like, okay. And this all came about, the genesis of this book was his friend Spike came home from prison.
Right.
Having had a 35 to life sentence and barely escaping the death penalty. And, Ice has told the story in many interviews now where he said, Spike said, I want to do a book. And Ice goes, no, like nobody cares. Like Spike, I hate to say this to you, but every guy that comes out of prison thinks he's got a great book. And then he thought about it and he said, you know what, Spike, the only thing that makes your story special is you have a friend like me. You have a friend who got out of that life and made it, whatever, quote unquote, famous. You and me make the story. And then, so that was already sold to Simon & Schuster. And he already had the idea, split decision. Like we took a different path. So Ice conceived it all. And then, publishers always want a proven name in terms of reliability and somebody who can deliver a manuscript on time and knows how to work with an editor. Yeah, they don't want your friend from right. from high school who says
I can do this.
Yeah. So they brought me on board and then the crazy part was we were going to go hang out for about maybe the best way to do these kind of books. So I write my own books, like the Last Boss of Brighton or Street Kingdom. I've wrote a book about a Jewish boxer, Barney Ross, but I also do these collaborative books. And what you do is you just kind of hang out. You hang out, you record the sessions, and then there's a kind of art to making it seem like the guys are just talking naturally. But what happened was we were just going to go hang out. Spike was going to get flown in from LA. I was going to drive over to Ice's place. And then, you know what? Exactly the date we planned was around, forget it was St. Patrick's Day 2020. So then COVID, yeah, we couldn't travel. So we then had to, like, I says steel sharpens steel, but I kind of prefer pressure breaks diamonds. I said, man, how are we going to do this book on the phone and WhatsApp and Zoom calls? But we did, I mean, I know Ice so well that I could get his voice, but the challenge was Spike, who I had never met. And, but it just, we all had to work virtually. Most people were working remotely. So I just had to write a remote book instead of hanging out and having sandwiches and Ice and Spike don't drink, but sipping lemonade with these guys. We did that. We just did it on Zoom calls when Ice was in Phoenix, and Spike was in South Central, and I was actually in Canada. So we would do this in 3 different time zones and then I would send them the drafts to them. And these guys, it's not like some celebrities don't read their books. It's really funny. Like they don't even know what's in the book, right? And I'll tell you a funny thing about Snoop, because I had to interview him at one point, but Ice and Spike went through this like with a fine tooth comb, and they would say, can you change this word? You got this one wrong, Doug. This is, but generally I was very faithful to the way they would tell the story. And like when I was just doing reporting, I remember calling up Snoop. I had to interview him, and he had a new book. This was when he was like 27, 28. And Snoop had a book out called The Dogfather. So I said, hey, Snoop, so what do you think of this, how this represents your life? And he goes, well, I ain't read that motherfucker yet. I was like, what? Wait, I got an advanced copy.
Why do I believe that?
No. And he goes, I ain't read that motherfucker yet. Why do you have a copy? And I'm like, I don't know, but your publicist put us together on the phone, and I can hear him smoking a joint. Like I can hear him getting high. And I go, and the funniest part was I was in the Newark Police Department detective. I was hanging out with the detectives. So I'm calling Snoop on a detective's phone, like from the police station, because I had to call him and interview him. And it was crazy. And now he starts telling me I didn't read my own book. And then he gets ornery about it because he's kind of annoyed that he hasn't seen the book yet. And he goes, I said, so do you think it represents a trajectory of your life? And he goes, well, how could it represent my life when I'm still living my life? Every day I get up and I'm like, well,
Good point.
Don't argue with me, man.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just Snoop. Like, there's guys that'll be like, hey, I'm doing a book. And then they talk to a reporter and the next thing they know,
Right.
I mean, if you're a smart guy, you read the book. But the funniest story about that was David Wells, the pitcher for the New York Yankees. I'll never forget. His autobiography came out and he had dished some dirt to whatever reporter, ghost wrote the book and about whatever, let's say Joe Torre. And they asked him at a press conference and he goes, I was misquoted. And they were like, you can't be misquoted in your autobiography. Like, those are your words, supposedly. But Ice-T and Spike it was the polar opposite of that. They went through this like, oh, dude, you said keyed up, like a key when they meant teed up, like tailored. So
yeah.
Sometimes I would hear a word and I would get it a little bit wrong. But yeah, it became like Ice has told this story. He doesn't frontland say like, yo, I sat at a computer and wrote this. He knows people understand the process. He goes, so what you do is a series of really in-depth interviews. And then a guy like Doug gives it back to you. And then, so you read your own manuscript like 5-6 times, like correcting, get this guy's name in there. I'll never forget. There was a scene, if you remember, when Ice starts rapping in LA. And I said, the DJs used to just stop the spinning the records and they would put on the break beats. And he goes, no, it wasn't break beats, dude. It was actually just like a beatbox. So that he would make me correct tiny things like that. And also lots of people are very sensitive. Like, oh, did I get mentioned in Ice's book? You know what I mean? Like his friends. So there were people, he was like, we should get John Boy's name in there. We should get so-and-so. So yeah, I mean, they were very, very hands-on with this and that made it a pleasure because, if you're working with people and they don't care about their own work, it's a little bit tricky, right?
Yeah, and it just really adds to the authenticity of it too.
Oh, you definitely captured their voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a trick to that. It's like when Ice read the first book I did with him, he said, dude, this is crazy. I'm reading this book and it's like I hear myself talking to myself. And Spike kind of said the same thing. And I've done enough of these things. That doesn't happen just in a transcription. You have to find the turns of phrase, the little, after talking to people enough, and good reporters learn this, everybody has little mannerisms and little ways of, Ice speaks almost philosophically all the time, right? He has these little aphorisms or his daily game. Spike is a different kind of storyteller, right? So yeah, I think I conveyed, and I kind of came up with the whole cutting back and forth from their point of view. I don't know how to outline things like that. I just felt it. Like, when should I cut to Ice? You know what? Sometimes like during the robbery scenes, I would like say, okay, now let's see what Ice is thinking. And sometimes it worked. It just went seamlessly. And then other times, like when Spike is doing, 30 years, 27 years, I couldn't cut back to Ice. I was trying to figure out a way to get it, but what am I going to do? Ice is at an award show. Spike is locked in these like maximum security level 4 prisons. I was like, it felt frivolous to then go to something Ice was doing, aside from Spike seeing Ice on TV and Spike missing all this stuff. It just felt like their lives were so separate. So the last chapter, I think you just hear from Spike until they meet again. Ice kind of vanishes because he's living his life. He's having a good life. He's a millionaire, and Spike is just trying to figure if he can make the parole. Wow, talk about two trajectories that could not have gone crazier.
You kind of teed up my next question for me a little bit. It was interesting to see in the book how Ice seemed to have some hesitation about whether Spike was really reformed after being in prison for so long. How much convincing did Spike have to do to get Ice to greenlight the project?
Well, I wasn't. So they had already.
Who was the energy behind it?
I think Spike always wanted to write a book, and then he'd been out. But like I said, Spike, it's funny in one of the. Oh, I think it's actually, if you get the audiobook, I do a little bonus interview with these guys, and we talked about the process. And then he says, I think Spike, what did you think about how we did this? Like, I think you thought you were going to come out of prison and sit up with a goddamn typewriter or some shit, right? And no, it doesn't work like that. But I think, so Spike thought he had a story to tell about sort of, reforming his life, redemption. And then Ice came in and goes, no, but dude, you gotta see it like this. We were two guys who were so similar, going the same path. And I made a few decisions, the key decisions to get out. And you just kept speeding in the fast lane. And it's a cautionary tale. Like, the way Ice and Spike both felt about it was, we've got to tell this story in a way so kids, at least, or people that might be on this path, can see this is no joke. Like, all these rappers now, these young kids are just glorifying the trap house, drill rap. It's all about drug dealing. It's all about this life, as if there's no consequences. Like, there's no happy ending. There's no happy ending to it. Like, unless you get out, you are going to go to prison or you're going to die. And I mean, let's say if you're a full-time criminal, the way, these guys describe themselves as, Ice will say, when I say career criminal, that was my career. Like, it's 5 or 6 felonies daily. He said, Doug, it's perpetual crime. Like, you don't take a pause at any time you see an opportunity. And he said, so there were thousands of felonies I committed that I didn't go to prison for, and I got a pass. So when Spike came home, the scene you're talking about, Ice is, like he said it very clearly, and I think it might be a bit of his military background. He says, I'm very methodical in how I do shit. He said, Spike's home, but now there's a bunch of obstacles. Like, has he changed? And that's the key thing Ice always asks, are you done? And in that funny way, he says, if one of my friends is going to get married, I ask him, are you done? I mean, you know what I mean. Are you done messing around with other women? Are you really ready to do this? So he wanted to make sure Spike was done with crime. Then he wanted to make sure Spike's ego was in check, because he said, look, I got a lot of friends that have been bosses in the street, and they're still my friends, but they can't work with me because I don't need a bunch of he needs guys who can just help out and be his road manager, his, assistant. So Spike is like doing security. So Ice had an obstacle course of things that Spike had to go through. And he's such a real dude. Like, Ice is the least bullshit guy you'll ever meet. So he's on the phone with me and Spike. He goes, Spike, I had to check you out, man. I wasn't sure you were done. Like, I would get reports from other dudes, Sean. He goes, yeah, no, Spike's head's in a good place. So he's very upfront saying, Spike, I had to make sure you didn't, and he said to me at one point, he goes, I don't know. Sometime I think the phone might ring and I'll like, oh, Spike tried to do one more job. Like, he's convinced Spike is changed, but
it's like a second parole hearing almost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember I asked Spike or Ice, and he goes, people ask me, do I trust? I says, I don't trust anybody except my dogs, I guess, and his wife, because, he quoted, I think the Reagan era line, trust but verify, with Gorbachev or whatever. He said, yeah, with everybody, I trust and verify. I check out my friends. I want to make sure that because he was orphaned, and because he really didn't have anybody around him as a kid that he could fall back on, meaning older brothers. Like, Spike came from a big family. He's a very self-contained guy, and he's very, very, very methodical in how he does stuff. So even a great friend like that, Ice is not going to take a chance. He did that in the first go round, with the Rhyme Syndicate. He's got like 40 guys traveling with him. And then, like Spike says, by the time he came home, that was down to about 4 or 5. And it wasn't because, Ice was sick of these guys. It's one by one, certain people started to screw up or take advantage of the situation or not be reliable or get him in trouble. If you've got friends who've been criminals, this happened several times with Ice, where he got called to, I don't know, testify or be asked questions. What did you know about this or that?
Sure.
Spike was very careful in his crime. People read the book to never mention Ice-T. And he's been in Ice's videos. So he tells the cops in San Diego, I don't know no Ice-T. And they're like, dude, I mean, come on, you're in his videos. Like, but he disassociated himself from Ice because he did not want Ice to be dragged into this nonsense that Ice had nothing to do with it. He had nothing to do with it. But of course, prosecutors, I mean, you guys do a crime show. Prosecutors would love to get a big name celebrity into their,
of course,
big fish. And then they get a big press conference, and the politics of criminal investigations. It's so much better if you have like, guess who we're going to take down, Yeah,
especially when Ice was a target in the cop killer days.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's still prosecutors who were like, Ice, if people are too young to remember, but Ice did this song where literally Time Warner got bomb threats.
That blew up. Yeah, that really blew up.
He was probably the most hated guy in America, but at least, Ice says several times, I think in the book, but he said it to me, dude, when the president of the United States says your name in anger, the next question to his chief of staff is, what do you know about this Ice-T? So he goes, I got audited 3 times in 1 year. And he said, you got an ice cream truck out front of your house in the middle of winter. It's like weird things keep happening.
Yeah, right.
He says that level of scrutiny. So that's why he's so like law abiding now, because he's been through that level of scrutiny, and he couldn't have anybody around him who would remotely, tie him into any kind of negativity. And, the amazing thing was asking these guys when Spike was fighting for his life in San Diego. It's like we're grown men. So you think you have a best friend, but you're really not talking to them every minute of the day. So Spike was in his trouble. But one of the reasons ICE didn't really follow it or know about it is at the exact same moment, the cop killer thing was happening, and that was taking up all his energy. And I guess, so Spike is fighting for his life, but ICE is sort of fighting for his career.
For sure. Yeah.
Whether or not he was going to have a sustainable career. And, now that he's been playing a cop for 23 years on TV, people can't believe it. Like the police associations of the United States were just like, ban this guy. He's actively encouraging cops to get killed, when all he did was write a point of view record. Like, he often would say in interviews at that time, if you think I'm out there killing cops, then you must believe David Bowie is an astronaut.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
or that David Byrne, Talking Heads he's really a psycho killer. And that song, by the way,
it's funny how people are sort of ignorant to ICE's message. Like the video High Rollers. Don't you see what happens at the end?
Yes.
Isn't it crystal clear what the real message is? But yet they twist it and say that he's glamorizing
here
this.
too.
Yeah.
Or see what they want to see.
ICE, every single record ICE really did about that, criminal life. It's like he says, I show the A side and the B side. Like it almost always ends with, the downfall. And like he said, people don't remember the last scene in Scarface, or we saw it, but they talk about all the money he had or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, ICE was very influenced by reading Iceberg Slim. That's where he got his name. And Iceberg Slim, as he told me in that first novel, Pimp, he showed the dark side. He showed the money and the, but he also showed that it's not a happy ending. There's no happy endings if you choose to be a gangster, unless you're, Carlo Gambino. I can think of a couple guys who died elderly, but he lived very low key in a modest house. John Gotti, Al Capone. If you live as a flashy gangster, and again, this is what makes ICE such a special guy to talk to, because we would talk about these things. He had read a lot about the mob. That's why he called his original crew the Rhyme Syndicate, because he'd read about Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, starting the syndicate, this commission. But he would just talk about how you cannot be a high profile gangster. He said the one thing that criminals have over the cops is anonymity, and that's why we actually called a chapter in our first book "Too Famous to Steal," because he already had a record out. He had videos on MTV, and he was trying to steal a part for his Porsche.
That was a great scene.
Yeah, but it was literally like, shit, I'm too famous to steal. Like I can't do this anymore. Like I'm too. So yeah, the idea that you could be a well-known rapper, a well-known TV star, and continue to live that life of crime. That's why I laugh about how, when these young kids tell me so-and-so rapping is a gangster or is a blood or a crip or whatever, I'm like, to a point, but come on, you can't be in that world and also high profile. It just doesn't work, Yeah,
it's also interesting how ICE points out that, like you said, some of the old time gangsters, maybe they died in their old age, but what people don't see is the stress that they're under at that time. Constantly looking behind their back, and how ICE was saying that really working a straight job is actually a lot less stressful than seemingly doing what you want to do, because you're carrying all that weight all the time.
He said that. He said, like, at the end of the book, I'm assuming everybody, these are not spoilers. He says to Coco, I sleep well at night because, if somebody's going to break into the house, what are they going to do? Steal the TV? Like our jewelry's insured. Our cars are insured. My money's in the bank. But if I was a criminal and I had drugs up here or a lot of cash, I'd be worried about someone coming in here and taking, tying you up. Yeah. And he said to me, I don't think I put it in the book, but I think he was watching Power, that show with 50 Cent's show.
Yeah.
And he says to Coco, do any of these people seem happy to you? Like, no, you're not. You cannot live. You have those moments, and, having written a lot about mafia guys, organized crime, of course, when they're bald, they're in a casino, they're spending $100,000 on a hand, and that's fun. But it's the kind of impulsivity and narcissism and, Ice said something in the book where it's like, there is nothing like the ego on a successful criminal, meaning you've gotten away with it for so long and you feel entitled to take stuff from society and you don't think rules apply to you. But I've seen that with mafia guys too. And they almost all have the same hardwiring, which is they never learned delayed gratification.
Right.
The work your way up and when Ice made the transition to music allowed him to still kind of live like a star. But, the street life isn't that different from being a rap star. But when he started to work on movies where you got to be on the set, you got to be up at 4 a.m, he said, you can't have that criminal mentality and do the kind of stuff I do on Law and Order, because you have to check your ego. In the first book, he said something funny to me about pimping and hoeing. He said, Doug, everything comes down to pimping and hoeing. I mean, anytime you do something for money, he goes, Doug Century, if you did a book that you didn't want to do and you're doing it just for the money, sorry, man, you're hoeing. And he goes, like on Law and Order, man, I'm Dick Wolf is my pimp. He said he's a good pimp. He pays me well, but I mean, he's my boss. Like, he just breaks it down to those fundamental things. But in order to work in the entertainment business and be a reliable performer and reliable anything, it requires you to lose that criminal sense of narcissism and impulsivity. And I'm going to take this now. Otherwise, your career will be very short-lived.
Doug, that brings up a question. In your view, how much change did you see in Ice-T personally between like that 2009 time period when you worked on the first book to present day?
He's been consistent because, when I met him by that point, he had already, married Coco. They didn't have their daughter Chanel yet. So the one thing that I did see was when he had his new baby girl, I think she's 6 now, he just became the most doting dad. And I mean, you don't see anything, but you'll see like the Ice-T scowl, if you see body count. But if you see pictures on Instagram and they're at Disney World or whatever, he's just grinning ear to ear. He's so happy to be a dad of a little girl. And he said Coco keeps him young. People ask him, like, why do you look so good at 64? He goes, I got a young wife, man. Like, she's keeping me.
That'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I didn't know him. Like, I know his manager very well, who's been with him for 40 years. I think he was a lot wilder in the early days of hip hop. But in the last 10, 12 years, one thing I can say about Ice is there's a reason he's been thin for 23 odd years. He's a supporting player, but he still has a major role on that show. And I think he's the longest running actor on any primetime series now because he's consistent. He just doesn't flake out. He's a very, very reliable guy. If he says he's going to do something, he does it. And that's not common with celebrities. I've been offered celebrity books to do, by the way, where I just said no, because the reputation of that given celebrity, even if the paycheck would have been very good to me, I know they're let's say difficult, or they might not be reliable. And like, let's say a very well-known athlete or rapper, hired me to do a book, but I wasn't sure that I would be able to spend enough time with them to do the book. When the publisher starts asking for the manuscript, they don't blame the star. You get, shit rolls downhill. You get blamed. You're like, why didn't you get the manuscript done? So, Ice is the opposite of that. He's so reliable and he's so quotable. He's the easiest guy to do a book with because Spike has great stories, but they kind of meander. And you imagine, that was the real trick for me. 30 years or almost 30 years in prison. There were so many stories. And I kept telling him, okay, Spike, we have 2 race riots. I don't need another race riot. Like, we just can't have, how many times can you tell similar things, right? You want to compress those moments. Whereas because Ice's time is money. Like, he's got so many commercials he's doing. I don't think he ever takes a day off. He's got so many things. So if he sets aside time to talk to me for the book, he's got, I asked him the story. He's got the story boiled down into 45 minutes or an hour. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and it has a punchline. And it's basically and that's also probably from having done interviews since he was, in his, late 20s. So he's got years and years of knowing how to do this. The average person, it's very hard to tell a story that doesn't meander or, you have to be good at that. But I have to say both of these guys are good storytellers. I mean, they're good at relaying the specifics, the sounds, the smells, all those things that you need, the details, right? It's just that Spike's versions were sometimes quite long.
Yeah, that definitely came through. And once again, you kind of set me up. The portrayal of prison that Spike gives is beyond scary. What do you think it was about Spike that allowed him to jump through all those hoops? In other words, to get past survival mode, improve himself in prison, and then, put in the work to get paroled?
There were so many key moments, but like I said, Ice is quotable. When Spike said, I had to become my mother's son again. His mother was a God-fearing, church lady who, just to set the scene a bit more, since I didn't explain Spike, unlike Ice, who was transplanted to LA without parents, without siblings, without love in his life. The first time he heard the word "I love you" was from a Crip guy, like he had none of that. Spike actually came from a 2-parent home. His dad wasn't around, but that's because his dad was military and was doing 2 tours of Vietnam. He had brothers and sisters. He had a stable home, but he just wanted that fast life. And he kind of blew his potentially professional baseball career. He was a really good baseball player, at least good enough to get a scholarship in college, and played against some top guys. I don't know. I think he had God-fearing women in his life. So it's his mother and his, the letter he gets a letter from his grandmother. I won't do a plot spoiler for people, but he gets this heartrending letter from his grandmother, and he's in Calipatria State Prison, which is one of the worst prisons, level 4, nothing but race riots. And he basically says, it almost broke him. Like he sat there saying, do you see how much pain you've caused the people around you, the people that love you? And one by one, I think it was also the deaths. Like he lost his father, he lost his mother, all these people. Well, his mother was alive with Alzheimer's when he came out, but one by one, all these people that were dying. So I think that sobers you. I think it's hard to know what makes somebody strong enough. He at least had the potential of a parole date. And he told me about guys that he knew inside, like that guy JMO on the weight pile. He goes, he had multiple life sentences. These guys, all they live for is that weight pile, and they don't have anything else. So, at least knowing there was a potential for him to get out must have been a light at the end of the tunnel. And then at a certain point, he did start believing in faith again. And he started to realize his mother, when he said, I had to be my mother's son, he said, my mother didn't raise me to be doing all this selfish shit, robbing people and taking, she didn't raise that kind of child. So I've got to prove that I can be my mother's son again. And that's the only way I'm going to get out of here. He had this, his mother at one point on this phone call, he was still scheming. Maybe I can get the witnesses to recant and I can get these guys. And she said, baby, stop. You're not in control anymore. God is in control. And he cites that as like one of the key turning points, when his mother, who never raised her voice to him, said, you're not in control anymore. So realizing in a way that you can't be this slick motherfucker who's gaming the system, who can get witnesses to recant. You can't do that. Like, you just can't keep doing that. So at some point he did have a change. He called that his Saul of Tarsus moment on the road to Damascus. Like, he really reads the Bible. So because, Saul had this moment where he became St. Paul. He was struck down. And I said, when my mother spoke to me like that, I felt like that. So I guess having faith, for a lot of people, it's faith. The self-help stuff they do. I mean, Scared Straight has sort of fallen out of favor, but he did that in terms of, he never was one of those guys screaming at these kids.
I liked his new twist on Scared Straight. I thought that was really inventive.
Yeah, he's like, form a bond with these kids. And, I think that's probably, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, we had that even in my high school. Some guy would come and scream at us in the freaking, and I was a bit of a truant. I wasn't a criminal, but I was kicked out of school or whatever for a few times. You have this guy coming and screaming at you, and everybody's kind of smirking, saying, what is he trying to scare us? Like, we don't care. But Spike would say, no, you got to bond with these kids and say, look, you don't have to be me. I see guys on TV that I played baseball against. I mean, a guy that I left out of the book was Keyshawn Johnson, was Spike's neighbor, and he helped kind of raise him. And, he said, I'm seeing Keyshawn playing in the, on the NFL games. And I mean, he was surrounded by guys who had made it, like Ice-T. He played baseball against Eric Davis. So, I mean, he's looking at his life going, I fucked up. So he would tell these kids that, I fucked up. You don't have to fuck up. That's what he would say to these kids. Sorry for cursing so much, but this is the language.
I was going to say, I mean, at the core of it, this book is a scary, cautionary tale. And one of the other themes that came up is the addictive nature of crime.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Doug, as somebody who's written a lot about crime, what are your thoughts on crime as an addiction, and how that applied to Ice and Spike in the early days?
I think Ice said it was, he called it's an ill drug. It's a crazy drug. And Ice is a guy that never did drugs and never got drunk. And I thought it was because he was, he told me once, if you're in the Crip set and you're the guy that doesn't drink, it gives you power because you're the guy driving the car. You're the guy that has to talk to the cops. But during this book, he said, well, Doug, I think it was more that I didn't have any brothers. Like, I would see guys get fucked up, get drunk, get high, and somebody would rob them. I felt I always had to be in control because nobody was really watching out for me. And when Spike goes through, he did Narcotics Anonymous, even though he never used drugs. And they asked him, why did you, at the parole hearing, and I read these transcripts, this is not his version. Why did you do Narcotics Anonymous and you didn't do drugs? He goes, well, I lost a brother to addiction. And I also think that my addiction was fast money and women. Like, it was addictive to me. I could see how, especially for young people, it's that sense of entitlement, that sense of power. It is, I'm sure once you've done it a few times and gotten away with it, it is highly addictive. I don't know if you really would characterize it the way alcoholism or narcotics, but I assume to some people it's the adrenaline rush. I mean, remember, in some of these crimes early in the book, they're not, like Ice would say, we didn't want to hurt anybody, because I knew that if you take a life, they're going to keep looking for you. We didn't even want to have a gun on the job. So the worst might happen is somebody might get cut with glass when we smash we didn't even want that to happen. We would tell them, stand back, stand back. But it's almost like I could see like they were getting away in these like motorcycles going the wrong way in traffic. And if they ever make a movie of this book, I said, wow, there's a lot of good action scenes, man. And I said, I came out of the military and I knew how to plan the getaway. The getaway is 1,000 times more important. And he said, some of our getaways were like parkour. Like, you had to be so fit. Yeah. So I could see, if you have gone into a store, you're a youngster, like Spike's 18, but even Ice, who's like 22, 23, and you go into a store and you grab $100,000 worth of watches and you get away on a motorcycle, the thrill of that must be so intoxicating to a young testosterone-filled guy. Almost like scoring a touchdown or something in a big game. It'd be like, wow, let's do it again. I could just imagine it in my own little experience, just having been a bit of a juvenile delinquent, stupid guy. Yeah, you get away with it and you're like, that was amazing. Let's do it again.
Builds confidence too, Yeah.
The more you get away with these crimes, the more you think you're untouchable. Yeah. And I think Spike used this word, I got away with so many of them. I mean, you saw the ones with the UPS uniforms.
That was crazy.
That was crazy. He goes, I got to tell you, I started to exploit white privilege. And I was like, wow. He said, it worked. It worked. I mean, that was really ingenious. And, one of the things I said to me when we were writing, he goes, man, we're giving away a lot of game. I hope people don't think they can still do this. Like, the way he would describe getting away in malls. He said malls are filled with catacombs of getaways, and you're always 20 yards away from any exit. So, and then he goes, Doug, I hope people don't try this. But and there were a few smash and grabs, one in LA where you guys are, like in Beverly Hills. And it happened before the book came out. And I remember Ice going, well, they can't blame that one on us because the book isn't even out yet. We didn't inspire people to do that one. But, there's cameras everywhere. I can imagine the ego you would build by getting away with it so many times. And Spike uses this word, I became a monster. And I don't think he meant a violent, even though really he was convicted of a murder or planning a murder unintentionally. Like, he didn't pull the trigger, but technically that was his case, murder. But monster, he meant I'm above society. And the book I would encourage anybody to read, it's a difficult read. I had to read it for my Russian book, is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
Absolutely.
Because Raskolnikov commits a crime, a murder, just to say, I'm above society. Plot summary. Guy commits a murder just to say, can I do this? He doesn't have a reason to do it. He's a student. He doesn't do it for the money. And then he almost wants to get caught. So there's a kind of weird pathology in some criminals, which is like, let me just prove that I'm better than everybody else. I'm smarter than you. I'm smarter than the cops. Brilliant thing that I said at one point regarding Cop Killer was a real criminal doesn't hate cops. You view the cops as your opponent. It's like chess or something. You think, I'm smarter than you cops, so you got to catch me. And if you catch me and I go in handcuffs, well, you've done your job. But until then, he almost likened it to the movie Heat, where, you know, De Niro and Pacino have this sit down and kind of say, I know what you're doing. You know what I'm doing. So anyway, you know, the idea that ICE hates cops is not true. They hated these, you know, the George Floyd type of situations,
Right.
which they saw plenty of. You know,
Right.
Spike literally almost got choked to death by his memory of it. He was like a 14, 15-year-old boy. But, you know, they saw this rampant abuse of the LAPD, who felt they were just patrolling a jungle. And, you know, but gosh, yeah, addiction is a very good way to talk about it. And I think there must be something. I think it's more in the young male brain, although we have a lot of women criminals. But, you know, you got that testosterone going on, you got that ego flex. And one thing I saw in Spike's parole hearings that did not come out in the book was he would just kept talking about when they would ask him why he did it. He said, I had such low self-esteem. I was overcompensating for all these feelings of my dad not being there and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, you know, to say that you were doing this. ICE says it in a more subtle way. He says, when you get down to it, we were just flossing. We were just showing off to women and to ourselves. We weren't saving money. We were just trying to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, right? So in a lot of ways, the deep psychology here is, do you have low self-esteem? Do you feel that you have to prove your worth with all this jewelry and all this flashiness?
At the end of the day, it always kind of comes back to that, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think people realize that a lot of guys who are, you know, John Gotti wasn't an egomaniac wanting to be on the cover of Time magazine. I think he was a guy with lower self-esteem. Like, the only people that want that so badly are generally people that have some insecurity about themselves, right? I mean, that's getting a little psychoanalytical here, but
Right.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.